Hey, greetings everyone, and welcome to another edition of We Meditate. I am your host, Ahmad Brown, and today I have a special edition, stepping away from, conscious information, the usual intergalactic dopeness, things of that nature. And I want to take a moment to deal with something that is very prevalent in the community today, and talking about a very, very strong social issue. With the Mike Brown situation. And with the Mike Brown situation, I want to actually take a conscious reflection or a conscious view from all of this to unveil some of the deeper issues that no one seems to really be talking about. When we talk about, the shooting of an unarmed black teenager by a white police officer. Now we know that this is a very incendiary issue. There are clearly, many racial overtones. And for whatever reason, because of the racial overtones, it basically muddies the waters, regardless of how, racially charged the situation is, how much proof, that there is within this country, within the modern world, that there is clearly, racial bias in favor of the white majority here in America. Regardless of how much information exists that shows that yes, slavery may have ended, however the systemic ills of it and systematic controls are existing in society currently really affect social economic disparities, especially among people of color and really among all minorities, how these things really exist. And it's unfortunate that because these things do exist, they exist in the context of a postmodern society that has extended its reach of these things that were explicitly dealt to the black community onto essentially all people who are people of poverty, or people who are of mental poverty, essentially lack of knowledge. And so because we're in a current situation where essentially if you are in any form of poverty, you are subject to, these things. However, the African American plight really wants to raise awareness that these things have existed in, communities of people that look like me much, much longer than they've existed in any other community that has existed. And so I want to take a conscious, stab at this particular situation that was raised up to show some of the underlying things that continue this cycle of racial separation, racial inequality, and show how it's simply fueled everything that has happened between that fateful moment of Darren Wilson and Mike Brown, and show how that those two men are an example of something that we as a human race will actually not let die. And essentially a cry or an outcall or an outcry for us to take a deeper look at who we all are as a people, and show that we all can be complicit, with our own demise based on some of the ties that we continue to keep in regard to social and racial issues. And so I'm going to begin actually with this Mike Brown script by showing yes, the dark side, so to speak, of the African American world, for a lot of people who may not even know that it exists. And then from that point on, I'm going to continue and show just how the continual onslaught of black life, how it actually was potentially spawned by something even more darker that no one really even pays any attention to, because it's so far in antiquity that we think it has no influence on the world today, when if we take a sober look at it, it's probably the reason why black versus white still continues in lieu of there being so many other nationalities here on this particular planet. So let's look at it. So we have peaceful protests that are seemingly usurped by a handful of looters in the media. The media is actually the perpetrators, I believe, of this Mike Brown script in the postmodern era. It is the media that wants to continue to keep people divided, to essentially dilute the masses, to make us look at all of our differences versus looking at things that bring us together. So even though we have peaceful protests going on in Ferguson, peaceful protests going on around the United States, for whatever reason, the media continues to gravitate towards the non-peaceful riots, or the pockets of people who essentially go, outside of themselves and hurt other people or hurt, the businesses or the establishments that exist in certain communities. And so many people jump on these bandwagons. They jumped on that script and say that, oh, these people need to stop. Violence is not the answer. But if we take a sober assessment at it, peace isn't the answer either. If we look at civil rights, if we look at slavery, for instance, black people were essentially peaceful as we could have been, but we had so much violence continuously brought upon us for no reason at all that this institution of slavery still existed for over 400 years while we were peacefully, being whipped, beaten, having our families torn apart, raped, things of that nature. So that's one example of peace not working. If we look at the civil rights movement, in the 60s, yes, we always championed Martin Luther King because of the peaceful protests, things of that nature. However, they still assassinated him, which was no sign of peace. We have Malcolm X, who was always, they championed him as, oh, he was the dark side of the movement because he was, pro-violence. However, if you look up his docket, so to speak, there was no violence ever really exhibited, no major violence exhibited with him. However, he was assassinated as well. And so we say that, peaceful protests are, peace does, change things. It does so in incremental fashion. However, if we really look at the view of, the African American plight here in America, peace has only brought us incremental increases or incremental, elevations in status, while we are still violently killed, while we are still violently, being put in the ringer, so to speak, either through the media, who continues to shine a light only on violence, through the media that continues to only shine a light on black crime, in the media that only shows like people who look like me being the reason why we're in this situation, without taking a sober assessment of the systemic social economic disparities that are in place in the society, in the cultures that people like me live in, that continue the cycle of degradation. And so until we look at the cycle of degradation that takes place, we will never solve the issue, because we're looking at a symptom, and we're not looking at the sickness, again, which I am going to get into. So we look at this unjust killing, and it raises up, racial division, because we have pockets of people coming out everywhere, looking at Mike Brown, looking at Trayvon Martin, looking at I'm sorry, the gentleman out of New York, I know his name, looking at the 12-year-old who was shot by the police without question. We look at these things, and for people who look like me, or not even just people who look like me, people who look like me, and people who have a heart of compassion, they realize that for whatever reason, we are perceived immediately as threats. Immediately when we are acting out, out of whatever is the norm, capital punishment apparently seems to be the answer to it. Or if not even capital punishment, just unjust force seems to be the answer to it. And it's somewhat disheartening to see so many people in favor of sidestepping, how direct it is. If we look at encounters with police officers, things of that nature, police officers generally respect or attempt to respect people of a certain social, economic, and national display. If you are, have a certain tax bracket, if you dress a certain kind of way, if you are of a certain skin color, you are treated completely different from people of a different social class. And it's not just black. This is people of poverty. People of poverty essentially are approached by police in much more vitriolic ways than people not of poverty. I mean, if you just look up YouTube, you'll see so many emerging examples of how this takes place, where police are in impoverished neighborhoods, and they treat the people with no respect whatsoever. And so this unjust killing is actually an example, or like it's almost like the pimple, so to speak, that's on the forehead of the country that is burst, that shows that this unjust killing shows how racial inequality exists on a cultural level, to where police officers have almost authority to use violent capital punishment on children simply because the children embody a certain aesthetic that incites fear, that is misfit for society, that is deemed deviant by the overarching society. However, when people like me look at someone of Mike Brown's ilk, or Mike Brown's, stance, we just see no more than an angry, troubled youth who needs guidance. And so we see these two different things running, but these things are running because of, again, like I say, deeper social issues. And so these deeper social issues are really being perpetuated by what I like to call a media god. They always say, the gods exist, different gods, things of that nature. But these gods are the cultural constructs that affect the psyche. And so many of us have really been controlled or heavily influenced by this media god that continues to run the script of division by saying, oh, we need to only look at the facts of the case. And then people who don't look at the facts of the case are somehow biased to one race or another. But again, like I say, looking at the facts of the case, do not look at the social economic constructs that exist underneath this case that show the systemic issues that still are not being addressed by, one, the national media, and then two, by the actual government, because the government is actually complicit in keeping these things in place for the benefit of the government's allegiance to corporations. I'm sorry, this is a little hard for me because I keep going off on tangents, but I'll try to stay focused on it. And so we get this whole issue of majority of people make peaceful protests. The vast majority of people make peaceful protests, but because of a small pocket of people who become unruly, we have a president who's detached from the communities of poverty. Don't know how this even happened, considering the fact that he came out of Chicago, one of the most violent cities in America. He comes from a place of Chicago, becomes president, makes all of his political allegiances. Now he's completely detached from the perception of poverty, and he's sending in military tactics on people who are vastly in the majority of peaceful protests, because the media displays a very small pocket of people who are rioting or who are looting. And so we have this imagery now running in place that lets the media god show and continue the myth that people of color are deviant people because they only want to protect their own when it's killed by a white person, or they only want to riot when a white person kills a black person. But they always say, well, what about when a black person kills a black person kills a black person? Y'all don't riot in that. Y'all don't have summons for that. However, the media god does not show all of the national summits that black people hold in response to black on black violence. The media does not show all of the small community initiatives that exist that try to stop black on black violence. The media does not show even the highly debatable or questionable, like Al Sharpton, for instance, who does a lot of work in the community to address black on black violence. The media guide does not show the communal activists or the community activists that do their best to stop black on black violence. The media guide does not show all of the servicemen that actually go into communities justly and try their best to buffer black on black violence. So we as a black people in America, we do things that try to buffer this systematically, educationally, economically. However, because it does not show up on television, that they move that from the side and they allow the script to run that continues to divide people who do not look at the facts of what's going on in society, and allow the division to keep running because they say we don't do anything to help ourselves when we've been trying to help ourselves the moment that we got here. However, systemic things keep keep happening that either discredit us or disempower us, because we do not hold the keys to production. We do not hold the keys to the media perception. We do not hold the keys to the overarching influence that affects the psyche of people as a whole. We are the ones receiving all of the negative images. And so no matter how much active work that we do to try to stop black on black violence, the media god will continue to separate us by showing that we don't care about our own communities, and by saying that we don't even know how to peacefully protest because of rioters. Now we need military level action taking place against us. And so those are part of these myths that are running by these scripts. And so we have these scripts, though, are tied to something even deeper. So again, we see people that are stuck in systemic poverty, and it is created by the masters of this culture. And the masters of this culture create this image where we as black people are continually profiled, defiled, and denied, and any release of our angst is essentially inappropriate. So we have police who are coming into our communities who are untrained, and they do not understand the generational mindsets of poverty that are tied to this long chain of events of African American culture here in America. And this is the problem that most people do not understand, which is why we protest a Darren Wilson, which is why we protest a Zimmerman, which is why we protest, the police officer who choked Eric Garner. There we go, Eric Garner to death. For people who say, look at the gray areas and say, he shouldn't have been in conflict with the police, you don't understand how we have generations of people who can't trust the police because the police have been complicit with our own demise. And this isn't something that was, back in KKK days. We're talking about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, where we have hardcore evidence of police using their corrupt power to arrest people who look like me, who are not even guilty, for the convenience of solving a case, while people who look like them go scot-free because of either some type of economic tie or because it would simply make their race look bad. And so we have to understand that this racial script is actually running, and people who look like me, people who come from these communities like Eric Garner and Mike Brown, they have angst inside of them, which is a response to real world accounts of abuse of power. So we have a Mike Brown who wants to chump a police officer because he really has the weight of his community being chumped by police over and over again. Does it justify it? No. But it shows the type of anger that exists when we can't trust the people who are assigned to protect us, because they're, again, protecting themselves and not protecting our communities. And this, again, ties into this anger, though, that Mike Brown has, this anger that Eric Garner has to resist. It's about the resistance from the perpetual things that have always been brought on us. If we look at the events of physical slavery, we were pinned down by chains, literally speaking. We were then let free only to be terrorized by KKK, only to be blocked from economic empowerment because we couldn't buy land. Our land was intentionally priced outside of our economic status because we were slaves. We go through that issue to being held down by KKK, to being held down by not being given land. That was stopped, even though it was yet still existent. We moved from that to gerrymandering, where political parties are allowed to put in racist politicians who will continue some form of systemic blockades from economic status. We go from blocking economic resources and equal representation in the Senate and state to the hurdle of Jim Crow. So we go from not being able to buy land to, we can buy land, to now, we can't even go to restaurants in public spheres. We can't even drink from water fountains in public spheres. We can't even use restaurants in public spheres. We can't even go to the same schools that you all go to. And here we're going to give you the books that we have now thrown away because they're obsolete, because new economic new educational, new informational standards have been made, but we're going to give you the information from 5 years ago to ensure that you have no idea what's even really going on in the world. So you have no idea what the new economic trends are going on in the world. So you are essentially not a part of the progression of society. We have Jim Crow that's in place, which have the economic, educational, social barriers blocking us from equal footing. And this is, again, just in the 1960s that this was just dismantled, meaning that my mother encountered this. This isn't something that is disappeared 200 years ago and we're still complaining, oh, we're still just stumbling along because we can't get our stuff together. No, my mother's generation just had the proverbial psychological economic shackles removed that were in place by the government, by the actual government. And so we have all of these things that are still being brought upon African American people of systemic, educational, social, economic denial, which breeds more distrust, which breeds more poverty, which breeds more violence, because violence is actually not a racial issue, it's a poverty issue. And so when we look at the systemic things that have been in place that promote poverty in African American community, we will then start to see why black people act the way that black people act. And so we can't necessarily say, put it all on the man and blame the man, but we have to understand that the overarching script that is running of the cultural identity of America, it is intentionally designed to keep a certain group of people second and or third class in order for its capitalistic agenda to continue to prosper. To make it simple, it needs slaves in order for people to reach higher levels of economic status. And I know we don't like that word and we think that word is not existent anymore. But yes, we're not working for free, but we're working under the confines of structural limitations. And so these structural limitations literally existed up until the 60s. And again, us being peaceful, we only wanted equal footing. And so we rise up and take a stand against this tyranny in a sophisticated modern form via Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, people like that. We become highly sophisticated and use the power of the pen to show that these things are wrong. And then again, the system actually kills our leaders. We finally have articles coming out that show the CIA claiming responsibility for the killings of JFK. We have things like that in place. So we really see that these government agencies are literally taking out people that want to peacefully stop systemic disenfranchisement, which still exists in this day because it never stopped. We had the Jim Crow dismantled with civil rights. However, right after Jim Crow was dismantled, we have the CIA transporting in drugs across seas, across borders, directly into impoverished African American communities to bring on the crack epidemic. One can argue that we co-opted into our own demise by selling it. However, when you remove all economic vitality from a community, like I said before, we were only being educated on economic terms or economic statuses that were 5-10 years behind what was going on in the country. We had a generation of men and women who were educated to be to be manual labor. They work in manual labor based on the economic standards of the books that we were even giving. Meanwhile, the country was constructing the next phase of commerce by switching to finance. So we were preparing ourselves to be, workers by hand, when the next phase was actually to be manipulators of money. And so the next phase of people move to be manipulators of money. It switches the whole job market. We now are in a global job atmosphere or a global marketplace, and all of the manufacturing jobs are now either dismantled or sent overseas. So you have a whole generation of men and women who are not even economically equipped to deal with the change in the world that was actually taking place. So now all of the jobs are removed, and then you have the CIA literally shipping in drugs across the border directly into our communities of people who have no jobs. And so now we make small incremental steps to equality. However, as soon as we get a foot solidly in the door, they switch the rules to economics, deny us the educational abilities to get the jobs, and then dilute our communities with drugs. And again, if you look up the research, the CIA has written apologies, or at least written confessions, that they were the direct agents of shipping drugs across seas into America. And so that's why we laugh at this whole war on drugs, because they're the ones instigating the war. And that's what we have to understand here with the cultural construct that we're living in. Our culture is designed to instigate situations that perpetuate these myths of cultures, these myths of standards of people. And after a fallout happens, the media and the culture itself says, see, look, they are the perpetrators. They are the ones wrong, when it was the system in and of itself who made the perpetrator. So we have this continual onslaught that I'm continue to go on. This continual onslaught that literally shows, systemically speaking, we have been continually disenfranchised even up until the 1980s, 1990s. That we need to really understand what a black identity looks like, what a black identity is, why a Mike Brown exists, why this bully who robs from the store needs to be looked at with a whole lot more compassion than someone who was worthy of death because he got into a fight with a police officer who, for whatever reason, is afraid for his life, even though he's the one with the guns. We need to really look at this from a bigger issue, because there's more. So we have, again, disenfranchisement in the modern economic era, combined with drugs shipped into our neighborhoods, and then they released welfare, and then the new slave, so to speak, is made. So we have people now who are dependent on the system because of economic and psychological disparities that have now been generationally inherited amongst these people who are simply have no will to participate in society. People who are on the welfare, they get a big blame. African Americans get a big blame, but we're looking at people who have been genetically produced to be second class. And in our modern era, we have enough awareness to where these people now say, I'm not even going to participate. What is the point of me from participating in the economic growth of this country or this society when the cards that I am continuously being given deny me access to the keys of society? So regardless if you think it's the right way of doing it or not, by opting out and then just depending on the system, we really see that, though, this is a psychology, though, that has been bred. A psychology that has been bred for multiple generations, from 600 years of social degradation and social denial. You have a new group of people who essentially are born to accept it immediately. And they buy into it because that's all that their generations prior to them has ever even seen or known. And so we have all of these people now who just said, screw it. You don't want me here. So I'm going to just get all that I can out of you with the fewest amount or the smallest amount of effort possible. And again, when those people, essentially, use the system, people still get angry with denying the fact that these people who are using the system have been designed to do so. And so we can argue back and forth about if it's right or wrong, but we cannot argue the fact that some of these things are created. They are created. And again, these things are created to perpetuate slavery. And again, we don't like that word. However, when we look at a hardcore view of it, we will see that we as a people, the people of Africa, were intentionally brought over here into this country to remain second and third class. And many people, argue saying, oh, well, your people are not worth it anyway, because you never even fought for each other, or you sold each other into slavery, which is how you ended up here. But again, that is a part of the cultural myth, or the Mike Brown script, as I like to call it here in America, that perpetuates flat out lies. They say we sold ourselves into slavery. However, that is not exactly true, because there's so much information that says that we as a people rebelled against the imperialist agenda in Africa, against the stealing of culture in Africa, and yes, the actual theft of people in Africa. This script that says, we sold ourselves into slavery never talks about the small wars in Futa Toro, never talks about the uprisings in Gambia, never talks about the actual warfare in Mauritania, in Sierra Leone. It never talks about these things in the 1400s when they were literally going into these countries, invading peaceful tribal people and bounding their people up and carrying them over to the West Coast to be sent into the transatlantic slave trade. The script never talks about any of these uprisings where people who look like me fought against the tyranny that was going on in those countries. All we hear is that, we sold each other into slavery. This script does not talk about King Pambazuka, who defended his people and was killed by enslavers and beheaded, and they took his head to the Netherlands, which wasn't even returned to his people in Africa until 2009. These are the type of things that the script continuously ignores when it perpetuates this image of black people that keeps the Mike Brown script running, that divides all of us and empowers this cultural identity that is about consumerism and about excess. Again, it's making black people, the slaves, continue to look bad because it needs either an actual slave or a proverbial slave to let the economic let the economic train, or the ball of economics, continue to roll. You can't have this level of economic success, of wealth, of just excess, without some type of lower class not benefiting from everything that is going on. And again, this is something that continues in our modern times, but again, it goes even deeper. Again, if you want to continue to look at why we are continuously angry and why we riot, we can say, we have a black president now, so that means everything is all equal. So slavery is over, or black people have no longer the right to complain. However, again, even in our 2014 era, when we look at the wages of all minorities in management up to middle management, we will see that on average, African Americans and other minorities actually make 30% less than the majority race here in this country. Meaning, a mid-level manager at Chase Bank, a mid-level manager at Chase Bank that looks like me will make almost 30% less than a white middle-level manager doing the exact same job. And see, the thing is, you will never know that because, again, how are the cultural constructs made in our capitalistic jobs? You're not supposed to discuss your wage with your coworkers. See, if we were to discuss our wage with our coworkers, many of us would then find out that, oh, wow, this person who's on the same level as me is making so much more than me. So then you have to what? Now, because you have that information, you are now empowered to go ask your corporate masters, why is this so? And then they will have to answer certain questions. But these questions will never get answered because, again, the culture that is built, this script that is built, is designed to divide and disempower the people. So when we're even in these corporations, we're not even allowed to talk to one another about the disparities that exist right in front of our faces. And so, we're not allowed to work for free anymore, but we are unknowingly working for a lot less. And so we have to realize that there is a constant barrage of disenfranchisement going on from multiple generations, and it has permanent psychological effects where this second-class mentality is essentially the norm, and poverty is an inbred behavior, even for people who make it out of these particular situations. Because even if we walk out and then believe that we are equal, we'll walk into a corporate space that will remind us that we're not, and a lot of times do it unknowingly. And so this is essentially how a Mike Brown comes to be, because when we look at it from a conscious level, we're looking at a unseen overarching psychological influence that happens to people. regardless of whatever our view is on spirituality and things of that nature, we cannot deny the fact that culture influences behavior. Culture influences behavior. And so this culture that we're in, when we look at a sober assessment of the history of this culture and how it was built, we will see that Mike Brown is a created entity. He is a created person. If we look at Darren Wilson, we will see that he is a created person. He is a product of his community just as much as Mike Brown is. And when we take a sober assessment of how all of these communities are constructed, we will only see that this is a violent issue that points to the divisions that this culture is continually trying to force us upon. It's continuously trying to disempower us by dividing us, by creating a code of silence where we never talk across the table to other people who are being disenfranchised, and we focus on our own disenfranchisement versus looking at other people's disenfranchisement. And then we will see that we're all getting the short end of the stick here by the cultural creators that want us to kill each other and get angry at everything that is taking place around us versus angry at the people who are creating the conditions that are around us. And so again, you see black people always angry, always in frustration, always in poverty, because this is how we have been implanted in this society. And this is why, though, you see our music is so violent, why our music is so loud and boisterous, because it's a product of the psychology. It's a product of the economics. It's a product of the culture that we're in. We have had excessive violence brought upon us. So our music represents that. This is why we fail in school, and why we're divided amongst ourselves, and why we don't know how to trust our servicemen and women, because the very land that we walk on reminds us of the constant betrayal that has taken place. Just like I said before, the economic disenfranchisement is not a myth. It is real, and it still exists. And some of us are literally aware of it, like myself, and some of us are proverbially aware of it, like Mike Brown. And that's why Mike Brown walks into a store and just robs the store of $1 worth of cigarillos. Meanwhile, our cultural creators, our corporate masters, rob its own employees of billions of dollars. But somehow Mike Brown is worthy and justified of capital punishment when the cultural creators are robbing both black and white, both brown and blue, both yellow and gray. They're robbing everyone blind because they want us to see a Mike Brown robbing a store and igniting our fuel for a gray area murder that still points into the cultural constructs that exist by the puppets, so to speak, who are wanting us to be angry. This is why they continue to run the script of division on television. This is why they continue to go over the facts and show the derogatory images of who Mike Brown was, but don't point any finger to Darren Wilson and his record, or Darren Wilson and the community that he comes from, and Darren Wilson and whatever type of sense of poverty that he has, either culturally or economically. They want to enrage and inflame people so that we remain divided and don't ask the right questions. And so we have to see, though, that we have this insult of injury going on, where police now are police force are trained to only see impoverished behavior and punish all of those who are perceived as threats. Again, the cultural creators have our police force designed to only see the bad in people. They only see the negative or the derogatory in people. If we look at the interview where Darren Wilson is giving his account of how he was justifiably killed Mike Brown, he kept using words that he feared for his life. When he was allegedly being punched, he said he thought he was going to die in the moment from being punched. And then when we look at his testimony in comparison to the actual medical photos of his face, he's barely even bruised. He's barely even bruised. Yes, Mike Brown instigated the situation. Yes, Mike Brown was punching him in the face. But if we take a sober look at the man's face, we clearly see that Mike Brown was barely hitting the guy. He was barely even landing solid punches on this guy. And so in that particular situation, for a police officer who has a badge, a gun, a taser, a metal rod weapon, he doesn't even have the mind or cognizance to use any of these devices to get a person from punching him in the face. He is stricken with fear of death. And this is, again, this imagery that is being created because police officers are designed to only see the absolute worst in a person. And so when they get attacked, they don't see a person who is the face of systemic violence, who is the face of systemic violence being brought upon them. They don't see the face of systemic disenfranchisement being brought upon them. They don't see the face of systemic poverty and psychological rearrangement being brought upon them. All they see is a threat that needs to be put down. And see, they're not even trained to see that the system is running inside of them, because they are the ones now protecting the cultural creators. They are the ones protecting this image of culture that says that gives a script for what a culture needs to look like. Meaning you have to act, walk, talk, dress a certain type of way to fit into this culture. However, if you don't fit that, you are worthy of a higher level of punishment. You are worthy of a higher level of disenfranchisement. You are worthy of a higher level of distress simply because you do not agree with what the culture says you need to agree with. This culture is intentionally undermining in our individualism. It's continually undermining our freedom of speech. It's intentionally undermining our melting pot as it says it's supposed to be. Because if we have a melting pot culture and there's a whole entire culture that has been receiving the butt of this culture's joke in this melting pot stance, they have the right to be angry. They have the right to be demonstrative. They have the right to look and act a certain way that is simply a response to the way that they have been created. However, our police force is designed to only put these people down and not actually stop the systemic ills that create these cultures, because again, they are powerless as well, because they're created by the higher ups that even built the city structures that these police officers are even enforcing. And so beyond perpetuating this ideal, we have to go through the monumental effort of we as black people have to go through the monumental effort of trying to be peaceful, of trying to, show ourselves in a different way. We have to go through the monumental effort of quieting our black aesthetic. Because if we take too strong of one, we are subject to not get jobs. We are subject to higher levels of scrutiny. We are subject to be looked at differently solely because we're trying to retain an identity that has essentially been a threat or a problem since we even got here. And so Mike Brown is carrying that weight on his shoulders. He's carrying this identity issue on his shoulders. He's carrying all of the generations of violence and poverty in his face, in his demonstrative stance. So yes, he charges at the police because he is tired of being the butt of the joke. He is tired of being wrongly accused, for just being black. He is tired of being told to, being authoritatively told to not walk on the street in his own neighborhood for no other reason. People are tired of just being controlled. We're all tired of being controlled. And so some of us just don't want to hear it anymore. And so Mike Brown, yes, was wrong for attacking a police officer. But his angst is literally the symbol of all of the angst of the disenfranchised. But what about Darren Wilson's angst? What about Darren Wilson's angst? Because he carries some as well, which is why he has these images in his mind that justified him shooting someone so many times. and all of the people who believed, that it was justified, all of the people who sidestep, racial inequality and say that something else happened. There is a script running in their minds as well. We have to understand that the tribulation in this modern Western world that we as African Americans are actually experiencing, where again, I don't even want to go through it again, the litany of cultural disenfranchisement that is literally taking place in this country. If we can take a conscious view of this, looking at the overarching history of humanity and not just the Western world that we're in this new world, modern and postmodern times, we actually have to understand that we are experiencing somewhat of a backlash to what was created before. Many of us know that the cradle of civilization came out of Africa. Many of us know that the oldest monotheistic religion hails from the Dogon mythology of Africa. Many of us know that the ancient sciences became modern education and modern science today. Many of us know that we built cities using mathematical equations or scientific revelations that our modern culture has not even rediscovered yet. We know that we had great large cities of Lemurian and Atlantean and Mesopotamic and Egyptian lore that rival, New York City today, that rival Dubai today, that rival, Los Angeles today, that rival, some of the great European cities today. However, this great lore and this great understanding of prehistoric world, also not prehistoric world, just pre-new world, where black people ran the world, where black people, were on top, where black people really were in the position of cultural creation that, people in the West are today. We have to realize that we did all of these things with the great error of being the first races. And this is when the sobering aspect comes in. Because yes, we're talking about racism in the new world. However, this racial paradigm that exists between black and whites, where yes, whites are the superior race, so to speak, in this new world, it is a product of the racial inequalities that we as black people actually created in the ancient world. Because we too have scripts that ran and are still running. We have a script that reinforces our superiority complexes. There are pockets of knowledge that exist within melanin dominant communities that say that white people were invented, and white people were invented to destroy people of color. We have other scripts running to say that white people were cave dwellers who were savages, while many of our melanin dominant ancestors were in the Mesopotamian, Atlantean, Lemurian, Egyptian major societies, and the white people were literally savages that ate each other, and they call them like ravishing wolves and things of that nature. However, if we choose to run this script of division, this original script of division, we will have to face the reality that using this script promotes the illusion of our own delusion, of the human delusion. Because if it is true that white people were manufactured in this same script or in this same myth, we have to face the reality that a black man created them. The black man Jacob. He was the one who created them. And he created them because it was other melanin-filled people that disgraced him from their own societies because he looked different. If it is true that white people lived in caves while the ancient world was prospering, then we have to face the truth that with this myth, we are the ones who created them because they were no more than a product of albino-born people. They were albino-born people, and because of their differences, we are the ones who pushed them out of our societies and made them dwell in the caves and disenfranchised them from all of the modern advancement of that time. We were the original oppressors. There's a saying that says, the oppressed will become the oppressors, if the cycle is not broken. And if we take an honest assessment at it, we as black people were the original oppressors. We were. We originally oppressed melanin deficient people and castrated them out of our societies where tribal living, warm terrain, metaphysical science, and the subsequent societies built upon those principles that still fuel today were denied by people who look like me. And so we have to realize that we are actually experiencing a form of karmic return on these generational investments that have been taking place for millennia. We have to realize that we are all guilty of inventing and participating and reinforcing scripts of division that uphold some myth of genetic superiority. We all have to realize that we are in this big cycle of human growth that is being slowed down by our tribal adherence to scripts, by our tribal adherence to myths, by our tribal adherence to the illusion of division. We have to realize that we have all been complicit with the script of cultural tribalism, and we have been engaging in a back and forth game of social, political, ideological, geographic, eugenic chess since the first civilizations, to make us think that one group is winning all over the other, when we have to realize that we're all being played by the game. We're all being played by the game of creating cultures. And this game of creating cultures is only fueled by the ego. And it is because of this ego inflammation, we think that we are better and we confirm it by disgracing another. It is because of this game of ego that we begin to believe the illusion of lack, and we also believe that we must kill to make room for ourselves because we believe that there is not enough. It is because of this ego inflammation that neither side of a national fence will let go of its frail case of superiority and will choose to collide and divide instead of mending the cycle of hurt and harmonizing our efforts for multiplication. We have to realize that these narrative scripts keep us divided and keep us continuing to reinforce subliminal inferiority complexes, which manifest themselves in literal ways that are promoted by our cultural paradigms, that are promoted by our governmental laws, that are promoted by our justice system, that are promoted by our educational system, that are promoted by our religious systems. All of us are peppered and sprinkled with memories of DNA from our ancestors that went through cycles of degradation and went through cycles of ascension. However, all of these different cycles always came at the expense of disgracing one another or being the disgraced. We have continuously been advancing ourselves in an outward way by disgracing ourselves in an inward way. We continue to make our societies grow up. However, they always defeat themselves when we continue to try to impress upon an identity on another group of people. This is why Mike Brown makes headlines, because Mike Brown is the perfect storm of racial innuendo that causes all of this generational angst of separation to come roaring to the surface. And this culture that we live in wants it to roar to the surface because this angst and this warfare promotes technological advancement. This angst and this warfare promotes the externalization of energy. This generational angst rushing to the surface, it promotes the vitriol that we need to keep separation alive so that we can continue to collude masses that make our society more advanced in our modern age. However, if we continue in this mode, we will do the exact same thing that every great culture has done. By using disenfranchisement to promote advancement, it will eventually burst its own bubble and collapse upon itself. We have to really understand that with all those great societies that I've said before, in all of the great societies of medieval lore, all of the great societies of of European lore, all of them have the exact same trend. They create a homogenous cultural identity, which is based on some type of cultural myth or some cultural lie that is a part of a genetic superiority complex. They build up their culture using division, using warfare, by using propaganda. They reach the height of their culture, and then they continue to march onward and outward in their ideal, and they eventually reach their limits, and then they collapse. And this is exactly what is happening in this situation with Mike Brown. Mike Brown and Darren Wilson are an example of the collapse that is taking place because we continue to divide. If we continue to divide our neighborhoods based on economic status, the rich won't have any more poor people to steal from. If we continue in this economic divide of education, we won't have too many more labor workers to produce the things that the smart people are creating, because they'll be too dumb to even get the manual labor jobs. We have to realize that if we continue to choose sides, we will enliven our primal tribal immaturity that will eventually turn against itself and kill everything that we have been trying to progress to. It will dismantle everything that we have been trying to create. And so we have societal denial and systemic poverty in the new world combined with psychological buffers of physical genetic superiority that run in Mike Brown's head that instigate warfare. All of these things are instigating his warfare, which is why he ran at the cop. However, all of the same scripts running in Darren Wilson's head about what to think of black people, about what to think of people in poverty, about what to think of his own race, are signified in him shooting him. All of the physical embodiments of angst, mistrust, and miss are running through all of our psyches. And so if we continue to let these scripts run, which is now being perpetuated by our media, which is now being perpetuated by our government's control, we will fall into the trap of bringing excessive force upon ourselves. Both of these men are examples of everything that is wrong with the human experience, because we continue to look at the symptoms of surface. We look at the situation of racism. We look at the situation of poverty. We look at the situation of classism, but we never look at the situation of ego. We never look at the situation of bigotry. We never look at the situation of what is that? Oh, crap. The situation of holding on to revenge. We never look at the situation to where we simply just won't let go. And the reason why we won't let go is because we all fear that life won't get better. We all fear that our claim in the world will not come to pass. We all fear that we'll live lives unfulfilled. We all fear that we're going to die. But it's because of this fear that every society continues to reach its height and then reach its own demise. It is because of this fear that every religion reaches its height of enlightenment, then tries to change the world in its own image, which leads to its demise. And it is because of this fear that neither side of black nor white will face the truth that Mike Brown and Darren Wilson is both of us. Both of those men embody both me as a black man and me as a white man. They embody both me as a black man and me as an Asian man. It embodies both me as a black man and me as a Hispanic man. It embodies me as a black man and me as an Indian man. We are all men and women. However, if we continue to let our tribalism, if we continue to let our scripts of culture influence our division, which is being perpetuated in our new world today, which is being perpetuated in our new world consumerist, classist, capitalistic society, we will fall into the trap of dividing again. We will fall into the trap of going back to our superiority complexes while denying the fact that we had to disgrace somebody to get it. We will continue to sidestep all of our ancestral connections to division. And we will never deal with the hurt that we all have collectively dealt upon one another over all of our societies. And we will continue the cycle of the oppressed becoming the oppressor. Because if we look at things and how they're going today, the cycle will stop. And yes, this reign of white people will end. However, if we do not address it with the memory, the ancestral memory of our own time of being oppressors, we will take over the world and do the exact same thing to white people as they did to us over these past 600 years. We are all hurting, and we all have to stop the hurt. We have to not fall back into the comforts of our racial divide, because it is very convenient and it is very comforting. We have to walk in the shoes of somebody else, and we have to see their darkness, because it will remind us of our own. Carl Jung says, knowing our own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness in other people. So yes, we can look at this and throw the race card and saying white people are dark people. However, we as black people are dark people too. And yes, we need to not let anybody off the hook, but we all need to jump on this hook together and use this hook to clean out our ancestral tribalism that reinforces our unwritten scripts, or these unaddressed scripts that says one is better than the other. And we all need to come together and put this script to end in this culture and bring down this media portrayal of, yes, African American men, but also this media portrayal of police. We need to bring down this media portrayal of poverty in the African American community and bring down this image of success. We need to bring down this image of USA global moralism, and bring up the cultural invasion that is actually taking place on this world. We have to realize that we are all cultural creators. And if we do not come together, we will continue to create this culture of division, which dismantles all of our power as people and leaves it in the hands of people who wants to keep this script running. So we have the power to stop this script if we all choose to come together. And as we can see, we're having very strong efforts to do so. The die-ins are great. The protests are great. However, now we need to go from die-ins and protests to having more people stand up in our government systems and dismantle this whole thing altogether. So we need more people who are courageously going to step into the face of real fear, which is the control system, which is the script running, which is the division in and of itself, the culture creators of division, and tell them to stand down. So we as a people can all collectively come together and stand up again. So this is just a quick overarching view of how we can stop the script and how we all have our scripts running. I am Ahmad Brown, aka Son of Pharaoh, and this is We Meditate. Peace be with you all. Wholeness.